Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this, the AmCham Sri Lanka IFS Premier Series 2020. The first of our series where we're in conversation with Dr. Harley Seyedin, recipient of the 2017 OSLO Business for Peace Award with Elon Musk, president of the American Chamber of Commerce in South China, and of Elon Energy Systems. We are honored and privileged to have the insights on the role of business leaders in sustainable global recovery through socially responsible corporate planning and preparedness that Harley will be sharing with us this evening. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to your host for this evening, none other than AmCham Sri Lanka President, Prasantha Jayamaha. Prasantha, over to you.
Thank you, Rai. And as Rai mentioned, we're kicking off the first of the series of AmCham IFS Premier Series. And in this first event, we have a very distinguished guest who will be sharing on his passion and experience, especially on sustainability. I'm very excited with what Dr. Harley Seyedin is going to share. The little I've heard, he seems very excited, very knowledgeable on China, has seen and grown with the countries in the early 1990s, has a lot to share in terms of wisdom, knowledge, and the reality of growing a business and an enterprise in these parts of the world. On some of the achievements that were mentioned earlier was obviously the Oslo Peace Award. But also outside that, he's a visiting scholar at the Jinyan University. He's been knighted by the Philippine Act of Parliament. He's one of 20 individuals that have been awarded the Peace Through Commerce Medal by the US government. He's also the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce of South China. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Harley Seyedin to start this webinar series. Dr. Ali?
Good evening, and thank you, Prasantha. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I thank Varai for giving me the opportunity to speak to you and to your members. I want to just simply set one thing straight. I think it's very important that we know that we live in a world of hype and misinformation. And the most important thing about us business people is to try to work our way through the mud and find the facts. One of the things that I very often ask senators and congressmen from US who visit South China is what they think is the average annual consumer expenditure of the average American that spends on things that are made in China. And I've asked that question from many people, including Chinese and people of other countries. Well, when we consider that US GDP has four parts, the largest part, which is 70% of the GDP, is personal consumer expenditure. And that's 70% of the $19 trillion plus dollars that US GDP consists of. The other three parts are rather smaller. There are business spending, government spending, and the difference between exports and imports. Now, when I ask people what they think is the average personal consumer expenditure of the American individual that goes to China and spends on things that are labeled made in China or have Chinese content, the answers that I get are usually 60, 70, 80, 90%. The lowest I've heard has been 30%. But the reality is that when you look at a study that was done by Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco some time ago, some years ago, 7 years ago, and I've since then run and verified the numbers every year. Still 70% of the American GDP consists of personal consumer expenditure. And the real number of the total average percentage in a year of a personal consumer expenditure spent on things that are marked, labeled made in China or have high Chinese content is 2.7%. It is not 90%, it's not 60%. However, 1.5% of that 2.7% is actually paid to the American worker for picking up the goods from the port, for delivering it, marketing, advertising, and warehousing, logistics, etc. The actual amount of money of the average American consumer expenditure in a year that goes to China is 1.2% of the total. Now, I have a difficult time accepting the fact that 90% of American jobs have gone to China because we have given them 1.2% of the money. This is what politicians like us to believe, even the media likes us to believe, or maybe they've never really checked the numbers. But the fact is that the loss of jobs have not been due to jobs going to Sri Lanka or China or Bangladesh or other places for that matter. They have been lost to productivity and automation, which has in turn created many other new jobs in return. Another thing that politicians, even the media, like us to believe is that the trade deficit between US and China is killing the US economy. Well, when I look at that number, I realize the last year it was $400 billion, which is quite a substantial amount. But as a part of the 19 plus trillion US dollars of US GDP, it's less than 2% of our GDP. Now, let me put that into perspective. If I, for example, am a country with $1,000 US GDP, and let's say Prasanta, as chairman of AmCham Sri Lanka, has $1,000 GDP, and he is a country, that basically means that I sold him $20 more than he sold me. And for that $20, he received very good products or services. Now, $20 in the term of $1,000 GDP does not really tear a GDP apart. It does not cause all of the ills and the problems of the country. Therefore, I don't even think it's a mild headache that can't be fixed with just a simple aspirin. Those are the facts. However, people are able to make us believe anything they like by simply presenting the same numbers in much different ways and much different interpretation. Why do I mention that? The reason I mention it is because I think the number one job of a business person is to guarantee that the decisions he or she makes are made based on facts. And it takes time and it takes some work to dig up the facts, because it is not in anyone's interest, especially those who have special interest in the process, to give us the facts as they are, as opposed to massaged and presented to us the way they feel like presenting to us. Now, having said that, I would like to go and talk a little bit about the Oslo Business for Peace Award. The funny thing is that one day my assistant came to the office and said, the Committee of Nobel Laureates in Peace and Economics called and they want to know if you will accept. And I said, accept what? He said, well, they had sent an email telling you that you have won the award and want to know, and they haven't heard back, and they thought maybe you're not going to accept. And I was laughing because I would have thought that someone would have given me a call, but we checked and naturally the email had gone to spam, and I had never seen it, and I would have never known had they not finally called. But that's an indication of how things work with technology these days, and we need to be aware that technology doesn't have all of the answers. It does create problems as well as it solves a lot of issues for all of us. Now, the Oslo Business for Peace Award, and I give you some background. If you may recall that Alfred Nobel in his will, did not dedicate or set aside an award for economics. The Nobel Prize for Economics is actually the Nobel Prize in memory of Alfred Nobel that was created sometime later, and accepted by the Nobel Committee as the prize for economics. The Oslo Business for Peace Foundation was set up to create a prize for business, which was not initially or has not yet been designated by the Nobel. And they started to present those awards for business achievements. And it is clearly, they state that it is not an award that's made for philanthropy or charity work, even though I'm sure some of that is considered. But the focus is primarily on new, innovative methods of investment that create new ways of doing business and in return serve the communities where that investment is made in a far greater, more sustainable ways than other methods of investment have made. For example, in my personal opinion, sustainable investment is not just planting trees or returning a mine to its original condition by replacing the dirt on the top or trying to recreate the environment as it was. To me, sustainable development is really very simple. Sustainable development to me means to invest in such a way that it will continue to provide people with the indigenous people who are affected by that investment the same opportunities long after the original investors are gone. The shameful past of colonization was the fact that it was based on exploitation. They came, they invested, they built, and when they left, people were back to the same poor level or underdeveloped levels that they were when the investors arrived. When I first made my first investment in China in 1993, I selected a town that did not have electricity and really did not have a great deal of industry to support the need for the electricity. But my belief was, if you build it, they will come. I had a very difficult time convincing my bankers. We could not borrow money to finance that power plant, simply because at that time China had a credit rating of 3 years international, which means that you would have to repay the debt in 3 years. And that is not possible if you're building a power plant. You need at least 15, 20 years to amortize and repay the investment over that period of time. We built that power plant. I was able to convince enough people around the world to co-invest in order to make the project happen. But my condition was that I wanted to make sure that the local people of the town owned a substantial part of that power plant. And that after we recovered the investment, that they could operate that power plant on their own, or they could upgrade it on their own, and a lot of good things would continue to happen, that they would not be poor again, rather they would have advanced with the technology that was invested to build that power plant. I was happy that I had AIG Asia Investment co-invest with us, Marubeni of Japan co-invested with us, Government of Singapore Investment Corporation co-invested in that project, and we made it possible. As a result, that small city of 2 million was able to attract a lot of investment. We had return of our money ahead of schedule, a lot faster than we expected and we had planned for it. The city, literally, that city of 2 million now has a population of 14 million. It has a beautiful underground subway system. It has high-speed rail, beautiful parks, boulevards, hospitals, clinics, and 14 million people in full employment with all kinds of industry driving the city. That is what I call sustainable development and sustainable investment. one that can maintain the environment. And I can say very happily that we decommissioned that power plant about 5 years ago, simply because bigger power plants nearby were built, and they were more environmentally friendly. So we decommissioned the power plant, but at the same time, the area had grown substantially. So it did not affect its decommissioning did not impact the lives of the residents of the city and the town. And we maintained all of the employees that we had for the power plant and changed the company into a logistics company, because we have warehouses and fuel tanks, etc., that we could utilize for distribution. Now, my plan currently, together working with the city fathers and also allowing the local people to co-own the project with us, is to develop that land into a 350,000 square meter industrial park, so that we continue to have industry and manufacturing within the city, and also building commercial residential. We're building within the same project. We're building a kindergarten, a primary school, a high school, a firehouse, an underground bus station, things that really make that area moving into the next stage. That is what I call sustainable development. Protecting the environment, doing the right thing, helping the people to grow. One of the things that I did in 1998 in China was when I realized that there were a lot of very talented Chinese students who literally qualified to go study in the US universities, but it was very difficult at the time for them to get visas to go to the US. And no matter how I tried, they were unsuccessful. And my point was, if my country was not going to allow these young people to go benefit from our education system, that would bring the education system here. Fortunately, in my past life, I was at one time chairman of Montgomery College in Maryland, and chair of all 17 colleges in the state. And as a result, I knew quite a few presidents of universities through the associations. And I married University of Incarnate Word in San Antonio, Texas, which is today 165-year-old private Catholic university, together with South China Normal University. I invested the money, we built a campus here, and the two universities, through a joint venture that we developed, offered several fully US accredited 4-year degrees in China without the need for the students to travel overseas or the US to pick up the degrees. And I'm sad that that has never been duplicated, because presidents of universities do not want to take a risk on offering a degree outside of the US in a place where, if problems occur, that their accreditation would be affected or impacted, or even go on probation by doing that. So they're very hesitant to do it. But having done those things, I think the reality is we can continue to mix profit with sustainable development. You don't need to exploit, no one needs to exploit to make money. There's a lot of people who have been awarded the Oslo Business for Peace Award as a result of the work that they've done. That includes Paul Pullman, chairman of Unilever, who literally during his tenure as chair of Unilever reduced the carbon footprint of Unilever by more than 60%, and he had a goal of 80%, but of course he moved on to other positions in other corporations. We have Sir Charles Bronson, number of very Elon Musk, of course, which won together with me. They are people who have developed new business models that change everything, change the world, and continue to help the world to develop in a very sustainable format. 26 of the past winners just 2 weeks ago we issued an open letter worldwide that to suggest to governments and businesses that we need to build back after COVID-19. We need to build back in a sustainable way. And we have an opportunity to help protect the environment because we know now through COVID-19 how we can go on without actually polluting the environment every day and creating massive carbon footprints for ourselves. Having said that, I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Seyedin. Very interesting and informative little quick presentation. I have a quick question, and I actually have a few, but I'll run you through them. In terms of your first investment, Dr. Harley, you went into a city that had no electricity with the intention of putting up a power plant, and this was in the early 1990s. You had no access to debt. It was 100% equity capital or equity funded. I mean, just purely for, I think, myself and the audience, educational purpose, can you run me through the process how you managed to convince your investors to come into a country that had a very poor credit rating, had no electricity, you were going to put up a power plant, then you want to gift the power plant, I guess, on a BOT, and there was no debt. So I'm just fascinated by that part.
It was not easy. It took probably about a year and a half of meetings in Hong Kong and all over the world, trying to convince people. The ones who actually invested were those who were familiar with the region, Government of Singapore Investment Corporation, AIG, Asia Infrastructure, Marubeni of Japan. They had a very good idea of what the future of China might look like. And of course, they wanted to be in China. No one had ever invested in a power plant in China. We were the first license, and we were one of the few that was ever allowed. And therefore, for Marubeni, which was in power generation, it was very interesting for them to get involved. And also the project was fairly small. It was only about $100 million that was used to build that plant. And dividing it between a number of giants, like Marubeni of Japan and $1 trillion Government of Singapore Investment Corporation, and at that time, AIG was bringing in about $50 million a day in Asia in new premiums, insurance premiums that they needed to invest. But the people who actually came in and really got interested was a small startup in New York, a company called Scythe, S-I-T-H-E Energies, which was a small startup by Company U of France, which was the largest water company in Europe with 80 million water subscribers. And they wanted to get into power generation business because the IPP new laws that were in effect, that had just taken effect in the United States, I think it was in 1989, that if independent producers could make electricity, utilities had to buy it. They wanted to take a lead on this project simply because they wanted to be in the power business. And they really didn't have any projects in the US yet. This offered them a big opportunity. So I guess a lot of it was perseverance, building a good presentation, arguing the facts that were of interest to the companies who would invest, and ultimately they all came in and invested, and they wanted more. Once we built, then they wanted more. And the company, what happened was Scythe Energies was acquired by a company called the Reservoir Capital, and they put in enough money in that company, that startup, that it became one of the largest IPPs in the United States, $17 billion in assets. over a very short period of time. And then, of course, Marubeni decided that they wanted to divest at one point, and that's why he went to Reservoir Capital. And because company that became Vivendi Universal, which you've heard of, I'm sure. They went from being a water company and a power company to becoming, by buying Seagrams, they became an online company and a media company, which is what they are now. The number of media outlets that they have right now. They bought Universal Studios, became Vivendi Universal. But Reservoir Capital then saw the opportunity in what Scythe was doing. And then later, that they sold the pieces. My friend who was chairman of Scythe, he was able to have 80% to be acquired by Blackstone Group. And it became Scythe Global. And as a result of that, I joined Blackstone for a short period of time, well, about 5 or 6 years, to help develop new projects, but I did not become an employee. I accepted to be president for Pacific, for Power and Energy Group of Blackstone. And I was responsible. We built a $1.1 billion project in the Philippines, on Luzon Island. Badly needed, similar concept, badly needed. And then we actually, after we completed the project, after 3 years, we sold it to a local company, 100% Filipino owned. They took it over and we gave them some other projects that they were developing. Also worked on, I worked on a $2.2 billion project in India, but I was only in a supportive role on that one. And Scythe got involved in that. So it's a long history. If you try hard enough, it will happen. It always will. If it's a good vision, if it's a visionary project, if it has a human side that you can promote, believe it or not, the small town in that city, part of the city is called Dungguan, a small town called Hojay. They are now the largest production center for 8-inch semiconductors in the world. So the development has been quite substantial. We can't hear you. Your phone's off. Your mic is off.
I said, thank you, Dr. Seyedin. That's quite interesting. And like you said, if you try hard enough, it's going to happen. I have a question pertaining to the current COVID environment. In your view, Dr. Seyedin, and I know you sit on many boards, and obviously you've seen across industries and across nations, and what opportunities exist for nations in Asia and even companies in these parts of Asia post-COVID? In your view, what are the opportunities that will exist?
Sorry. Certainly, out of any adversity comes opportunity, that we know. COVID is changing the way business is done. COVID is changing the way investment is done. COVID has helped bring people closer together. Even though we don't meet in person, people are meeting much more often online and in much larger groups, where it used to be the business was done in small groups of 2 or 3 or 4 in boardrooms. I think that has changed a great deal of things. I don't know exactly what kind of business is going to be the most successful model going forward, but whoever can identify the opportunities and can invest in them and is going to be winner. The key is, I think people are very much aware of health. Because of COVID-19, people have become aware of the luxuries that they have lost as a result of COVID-19. And I think people want to have a sustainable way of development going forward and healthy way of living. One of the things that I like to share with you is the comments I made after I was presented my award at the Oslo City Hall. And the good thing is that before you go through the award, they take you and you have dinner at the Crown Prince's residence, and they treat you like royalty, something I'm never used to, and then you go get your award, and one of the things that I commented on is that I honestly and then truly believe that there's a fire that burns within each and every one of us, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of religion, regardless of origins. And that fire is to give our children a better life than we had ourselves. That doesn't matter how well we were brought up, how good our life was. We want to give our children a better life and a better opportunities than we've had ourselves. Now, when I do a deal or when I invest in a project and when I sit down and across from a man or woman with whom I'm negotiating a deal, what I see is that fire. I see what they're trying to do is find a way to give their children a better life than they've had. And I commit myself to making sure that at the end of the session of negotiation, that not only that person has achieved their goal, that I also have achieved that goal. And through that, we both walk away from the table knowing that we're going to give our children a better life. Now, giving our children a better life means a better environment, a sustainable future, clean air, clean water, jobs, opportunities, better pay, better education. Now, if I'm able to give that to my children and you are able to give to your children and everyone who's on this call is able to achieve that, we're going to have a beautiful world ahead of us. So I think that is what needs to be our goal going forward, to help the other person have the ability to give their children a better life than they've had. And I think that is really an important goal that I've kept in my mind. I've suggested it to everybody every chance I have, and I can't repeat it enough tonight.
It is truly a beautiful thought and goal, Dr. Harley. A win-win at a tough negotiation is actually a tough thing to do. But a wise man once told me, always leave a few coins on the table.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Don't cut it too fine.
You have to. You can't take it all. It is, it will come back to haunt you when you do. And I'm sure you've never done that. It's it's a lot more pleasant to give and give back than to take.
Exactly. Thank you. Dr. Seyedin, we have a question from the audience. Someone from the audience, Danushka, has queried about if you could re-explain what was said about the misconceptions on the US consumption and jobs.
Certainly. The reality is that when you turn on the TV, whether it is Democrats or Republicans, I mean, I'm not talking about politics or religion. I'm simply talking about what we are led to believe, okay? The reality is US GDP consists of 4 parts. The largest is personal consumer expenditure of the average American. And if you ask them how much of their money that they spend in a year goes to China, they will tell you it's 60%. I think if you ask someone in Sri Lanka that question, they're going to tell you most of their money goes to China. And that's not reality. The reality is that what you need to do is really take that portion of GDP that consists of personal consumer expenditure and break it down to see how much of a person's consumer expenditure is actually going outside of the country. In the case of US, is 1.2% of the total average consumer spending in a year that goes to China. However, the media, politicians of both sides, somehow have us convinced that it is 60 or 70% of their annual spending. The numbers, I didn't make them up, those are real numbers. Anybody can run those numbers. But where I learned, first time I learned those numbers, was from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco report. And the reason they had done the research was not to see what percent of our American money went to China. It was to see what would the impact of inflation in China be on the American consumer, because if you believe 90% of your money is spent on things that are made in China, well, inflation in China is going to hurt the American consumer. But the result was totally surprising to everybody. I can share other facts with you. For example, one of the studies that we assisted Professor Michael Enright of University of Hong Kong, former faculty at Harvard Business School. He has a research company that spent 16 months running numbers to determine the impact of foreign invested enterprises on the Chinese economy. I mean, what impact do we have on the economy? Well, if you simply take FDI, foreign direct investment, of foreign companies in China, the amount of money that is spent by their employees, and some other multipliers, we come with a final number that 1/3 of China's GDP is created by foreign invested enterprises. 27% of employment in China is created by foreign invested enterprises. Now, the reality is that foreign invested enterprises concentration is primarily on the east coast and southern coast of China, and not across China. So if we took look at Shanghai, one of the best educated, more advanced cities in China, you will see that 67% of the industrial output of Shanghai is created by foreign invested enterprises. 1/3 of taxes, 1/3 of employment, 1/3 of the GDP. But when we look at the higher technology output, 90% of Shanghai's high-tech output is created by foreign invested enterprises. If we take the same thing down south, for example, Shenzhen, which is right on the border with Hong Kong, the first place in China that opened, 50% of the employment and 50% of GDP of Shenzhen is created by foreign invested enterprises. Now, when we look at an American investment, the multiplier return for GDP for every dollar of the American investment, FDI in China, is 180 times. That means for every million that an American company invests in China, it creates $180 million in GDP. Now, these are numbers that most people never look at. We simply, politicians of both sides around the world, Europe, United States, name it, it doesn't matter. They all talk about how close China is. Well, I don't find a country where 1/3 of its GDP is created by foreign investment and foreign invested enterprises as a closed economy. There are 38 areas that are still on China's negative list that I believe should open up, but for most part, it is open. I don't believe US would really be comfortable if 1/3 of its GDP was created by foreign companies. I don't think any company would be that comfortable. The reason I talk about facts and reality is that very often our lives are driven by decisions that are made based on emotion, hype, and misinformation, or massaged information, information that's presented, in different ways than it should be. Of course, when you look at a deficit of 400 billion, it's a lot of money, but in terms of a GDP of 19+ trillion, it's not. It's less than 2%. It's how we look at things. And I think as business people, and I know what we have online today as a part of this discussion, are business people, if we look for the right information, we will find it. And once we find it, we make our investment based on fact. And I don't know of any investment failures that were made based on fact and good anticipation and on feasibility studies, on research. Unfortunately, in our daily lives, a lot of our decisions are made not based on facts.
Yes. Dr. Harley, and to add to that, maybe also access to that information and not basing it on presumption, which is a very dangerous thing.
Well, a lot of times you have to dig for that information. It takes effort, yes. No one wants you to have the reality or the truth very easily.
But it's certainly interesting in the way you explained the U.S. investments into China. A big part of AmCham Sri Lanka, I didn't have that view or that information available. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Harley. And on a recent article with the China Morning Post, you had noticed the importance of enterprise risk management, and you'd also stated that helped you and your group to navigate the fallout from the corona pandemic. How would you like to? Would you like to share some learnings from that to the business leaders in this group?
Certainly, it's just another thing. One of the things that upsets me, in a way, is the fact that as America, as the United States, we have health departments at the national level. We have health departments at the state level, and literally every city. There are tens of thousands of doctors, immunologists, etc., that are employed by our governments, various levels. There are billions and billions of dollars that are spent on people whose job is to have had us prepared. What disappoints, and what I remember Keith Bradsher, New York Times bureau chief in Hong Kong, back in 2006, he wrote an article where I had interviewed with it, and the comment that was made, and the point that he made, and I stressed upon, was it's not a question of if a pandemic will happen. It's a question of when. Okay, we know it's happened in the past. We knew SARS happened. We knew MERS happened. And we knew, at least the experts within our government should have known that it was a question of when. And why was it that they did not have us prepared? When you look at most governments, you will see there was a shortage of masks, there was a shortage of PPEs, there was a shortage of respirators, there was a shortage of drugs, there were shortages of hospital beds, etc. Well, excuse me. The one thing, I don't believe the first question that an government official, an elected government official asked at their inauguration is how many masks we have in the basement. They assume that the experts who have been paid for years, have already have us prepared. Because we have devoted the money, we have spent the money. Where did that money go? Why didn't we have enough? But unfortunately, the systems are set up, and I bet you it's the same in Sri Lanka as it is in the United States, as it is in Great Britain, wherever we have the elected officials, is the fact that somehow the bureaucrats are able to blame it all on the elected politicians who were just elected last year. And it was their problem. They didn't ask for how many masks we had in the basement. And it is the politicians who are making the mistake in this and that. Well, if we had been prepared, and if there was a plan in place that would have taken care of the problem, we would not be here. We would have been in much better position. Now, what I'm saying is that because one of the things that we did as a chamber here is we actually forced our companies over and over by just talking nonstop to develop plans to deal with any kind of a breakout. You have to remember this. My brother is a doctor in Los Angeles, and he asked me a question which kind of surprised me because I hadn't thought about it. He said, Harley, look, India and China have similar populations, but how come a pandemic or an epidemic never comes out of India? And when you look at history, yes, there hasn't been too many outbreaks that have come out of India. Well, we need to know about that. And since we live in China, knowing that most of them are originate here somehow, that we should be prepared for it. And that's what we did. Most of our companies, I think our companies were very well prepared. Our companies had supplies of antiviral drugs, and they had stockpiled, they had masks, so we were able. The fact is that we just finished the study. We did one in March, and by March, I think it was middle of March, 95% of our companies were already fully operational here in China. And when you look at some of the other areas, they're still having the difficulties. So yes, preparations is extremely important. Predicting the future is what makes you a lot of money. And sometimes it's not that difficult to predict the future.
And it's not really about predicting it, it's just looking at history and being knowing that history repeats itself.
Yes.
Dr. Harley, I have one last question in the interest of time, and this is from Pemita. He's written that many American and European MNCs are moving into larger Asian countries, which have obviously larger resources, populations, have bought in the benefits that you explained, the multiplier effect of $1 million into 180. What about island nations like Sri Lanka and Maldives? How do these FDIs, can they give those returns? Are they giving any of that? Do you have a view on it more than anything else?
Well, the reality is this, there's a lot of talk about people moving out of China, moving into other locations, and that's not really the right way to look at the statistics and what is really happening. What is happening is, if you look at Japan, after World War II, Japan became the workshop of the world. Yeah. Everything that was low tech, labor intensive, energy intensive was made in Japan. I remember that as a child. As Japan acquired better technology, experienced shortage of labor, it moved its low-end production to South Korea. For a period of time, South Korea was workshop of the world, mostly invested by Japanese companies. As South Korea developed its own technology, a lot of that lower end, not necessarily lower, but labor intensive, energy intensive, lower technology required products moved to Taiwan. And that was South Korean companies and Japanese companies setting up in Taiwan. As Taiwan experienced development, things moved to Hong Kong. As Hong Kong experienced, China opened up, Japan and Taiwan and South Korea, Hong Kong, they moved everything into China. Now, after about 20, people say 4 years of opening, but the reality is that the development of China really didn't start till October 2nd, 1992. When Deng Xiaoping went to Shenzhen and said to be rich is glorious. That's when it really opened up. So it's 28 years of development. In these 28 years, the first model was to bring energy from all over China into Guangdong province, into Shenzhen, bordering with Hong Kong, to use ports and logistic capabilities of Hong Kong to export the product that were made here. It really makes no sense to make it in the middle of China or even in Shanghai or Beijing to do that. This was the best part to do it. The capability was right across the border with Hong Kong. To do that, they had to bring in labor from all over China. They had to bring in all the energy from all over China, given that Guangdong has no fuel of its own, no hydros, no substantial energy source. So all the energy had to be imported. A lot of it was being imported as coal from Australia, Indonesia. A lot of LNG is being imported from Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia. Now, what happened was when we looked at our companies in 2003, and we have 2,300 members, our companies, less than 23% were selling what they made in South China to China. As of March of this year, when we did our new study, 71% are not here to export anymore. They're here primarily producing goods and services in China for China. 23%, less than 30% are still in some export manufacturing. Now, what happened to that 70%? Well, they diversified, they built better facilities here to produce in China for China, but at the same time, they moved their production facilities to countries south of China. I'll give you an example. In 12 years ago, the biggest factories for Nike were here in Guangdong province, in Dongguan and Sinyuan cities. Today, they're in Vietnam. But the Vietnam operations, which are now very large, the largest in the world, are primarily for export out of Vietnam. The Chinese operations, which are as big as Vietnam now, are producing shoes primarily for Chinese market. So now if you buy shoes outside, if you buy Nikes outside of China, most of them are, you're gonna see are marked as made in Thailand, made in Indonesia, made in Malaysia, and not in China. That is a transition that is natural. Japan went through it, South Korea went through it, Hong Kong and Taiwan went through it, and China is not going through it. What does that mean? That means export manufacturing has already migrated in big part, and is going to continue to migrate. And the key to do that is to find out, what companies are trying to move, and offer the capabilities in those areas to the companies. And what are those capabilities? Well, building infrastructure that can support that type of manufacturing. If you don't have the ports, well, it makes it difficult. If you don't have the roads that can take from factory to the port, it makes it difficult. Infrastructure geared specific towards certain types of industry is going to be very important in attracting new investment. Long answer, very long answer to your short question. Sorry.
No worries. Dr. Harley, I want to thank you. We really enjoyed what you shared, and not only from your experience, but the view that you've given. Certainly, I'm taking back a few things to think about on sustainable development, and also, the role that China has played. The media and politics right now likes to portray things in a certain way, and I guess we all believe what we read.
Yes.
So thank you, Dr. Harley, by AmCham Sri Lanka, and the audience here. We really appreciate what you've done. Rai, over to you to conclude.
Thank you, Prasanta. Thanks, Dr. Seyedin and Prasanta, for the time that you spent with us. And Dr. Seyedin, an absolute pleasure hearing your thoughts. I'm sure that all our members who are listening in and joining us here would take away a lot of interesting thoughts. And as is wont with our webinars, I'm sure that there'll be a few questions that will pop up after the session and come to me via email, which I hope you don't mind if I forward to you for any more detailed sort of responses. Thank you once again, and of course, lovely. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you to every single one of our participants as well, and not forgetting, of course, IFS, our partners, IFS, Delhi FT, and Grow Global, who will be bringing this out and across to our members, of course. Join us again on the next Premier Series, which is, as promised, the third Thursday of each month in the next 6 months. We look forward to it. And once again, thank you from AmCham Sri Lanka.